The mid-afternoon sun hung high above, casting its golden rays over the courtyard as I scrubbed clothes, my hands working on autopilot. The rhythmic sound of water splashing was soothing, almost enough to drown out my thoughts. Almost. But then a prickling sensation crept up my neck, an uneasy feeling that someone was watching me. I paused, gripping the edge of the basin, and slowly lifted my gaze. My breath hitched. On the rooftop stood my brother-in-law, his figure outlined against the bright sky, a sly smile curling on his lips. For a moment, I froze, unsure if I had imagined the whole thing. But no, his grin widened as our eyes met, a grin that sent a shiver down my spine. For weeks now, I had been noticing his behavior changing, like a shadow darkening over time. Once respectful and polite, he had grown bold, too bold. His words, once innocuous, now carried double meanings, laced with insinuations I couldn't ignore. He no longer averted his gaze when speaking to me, his eyes lingering longer than they should. At first I had brushed it off, convincing myself it was all in my head. After all, he was the youngest son of the family, the apple of everyone's eye. My mother-in-law shielded him from every critique, and even my husband adored him, often reminding me to take special care of him. But today his smirk from the rooftop was a warning, a sign that this wasn't just in my head anymore. Something had shifted. Before I could decide what to do, he came down the stairs and strolled into the courtyard. Without hesitation, he sat down right next to me. My heart quickened. I suddenly realized my scarf had slipped from my head. Embarrassed, I quickly adjusted it, but the smug smile on his face didn't waver. "There's no need to cover yourself around me," he said, his voice smooth but dripping with something sinister. "I'm not a stranger." His words struck me like a slap. I turned to him, my voice trembling but firm. "To me, every man except my husband is a stranger." He leaned back, letting out a low, mocking laugh. "You're not the first woman I've met who thinks that way," he said, his tone unnervingly casual. "But trust me, it doesn't take much for them to see things differently. Just a single moment, a single gesture, and their whole world changes." His words were like poison, seeping into my mind. My hands clenched into fists, my jaw tightening. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, trying to mask the fear creeping into my voice. He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing, as his voice dropped to a whisper. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "Not just find out, you'll experience it. Life is so much more enjoyable when you let go of these useless boundaries." My breath caught in my throat as he chuckled, a sound so cold it felt like the walls of the courtyard were closing in around me. Before I could respond, he stood and sauntered away, leaving me trembling with anger and disgust. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but just as I opened my mouth, I saw my sister-in-law walking toward me. She was the last person I wanted to see. Our relationship was strained at best, and she had a knack for inserting herself into situations where she wasn't welcome. Still, her expression was unusually grave, and I couldn't ignore her. "Something terrible has happened," she said, her voice urgent. I stared at her, my unease growing. "What is it?" I asked, my hands still trembling from the earlier encounter. "It's your husband," she said. "He fell sick at work today. Your brother-in-law took him to the hospital." The words struck me like a thunderclap. "What happened to him? Is he okay?" I asked, my voice rising in panic. Her next words felt like the sky itself had collapsed onto me. "The doctors say it's cancer, stage 2. My world spun. The clothes in the basin, the courtyard, the sunlight, all of it faded as her words sank in. My husband, my anchor, my protector. Cancer? I couldn't process it. "I need to see him," I said, my voice breaking. "Take me to him." She placed a hand on my shoulder, her face softening. "Calm down. It's still early. The doctors say there's hope. But you need to be strong for him now. He'll need you more than ever." I nodded numbly, wiping away the tears streaming down my face. But as I gathered myself to leave, another thought clawed its way into my mind. My brother-in-law. If something happened to my husband, who would protect me from him? The very idea made my stomach churn. I rushed out of the courtyard, my mind racing. As I reached the doorway, I collided with someone, Looking up, my heart sank. It was him, my brother-in-law, his face twisted into that same predatory smirk. "So the moment I've been waiting for has finally arrived," he said, his voice low but dripping with malice. He stepped closer, his breath hot against my ear. "You're all alone now, and soon you'll realize that there's no one left but me." His words sent a chill through my entire body. My sister-in-law was ahead, too far to hear or see what was happening. He leaned in even closer, his voice dropping to a sinister whisper. "It won't be long before you come to me willingly." Something inside me snapped. Without thinking, I spat in his face, my anger boiling over. He recoiled, momentarily stunned, and I used the opportunity to push past him. As I hurried away, my mind was a storm of fear and determination. Whatever happened, I would fight. For my husband, for myself, and for the life that this man thought he could take from me. The courtyard was quiet except for the faint rustle of the afternoon breeze. My heart was still racing as I stood frozen, leaning against the wall, trying to catch my breath. His face had turned crimson with rage, a stark contrast to the smug smirk he usually wore. My brother-in-law had grabbed my arm moments ago, pinning me to the wall, his voice low but dripping with menace. "I'll make you pay for this," he had hissed, with interest. And then, just as suddenly, he'd stormed off, leaving me trembling and clutching my arm where his fingers had dug in. What had I done to awaken such anger in him? As I stood there, the memory of a long-forgotten mistake came rushing back. 5 years ago, I had shown him a picture of myself from my college days. It was a casual moment, something I hadn't thought much of. But that picture, youthful, carefree, had left a mark on him. Over the years, his behavior had shifted subtly, then more overtly, until now, when his obsession had become undeniable. It was as if he'd been living in the shadow of that picture, clinging to a version of me that no longer existed. I shook my head, angry at myself for not recognizing the danger sooner. That single moment of carelessness had sown the seeds of the nightmare I now faced. When I reached the hospital, my chest tightened at the sight of my husband. His face was pale, his once strong frame now frail and tired. The vibrant man I had married just 3 months ago looked like a shadow of himself, but when he saw me, he smiled, a weak but genuine smile that momentarily eased my heartache. "Don't cry," he said softly, his voice steady despite the strain. "I'm not going anywhere. You're stuck with me." His attempt to comfort me made my tears fall faster. I leaned in, wrapping my arms around him. "Get better soon and come home," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I can't do this without you." Before I could finish, my sister-in-law entered the room. Her presence always carried a certain authority, but today her expression was somber. "He won't be coming home anytime soon," she announced bluntly. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I pulled away from my husband, my eyes searching his face for reassurance. But he looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He'll need at least 6 months of treatment," she said. "He can't come home until the doctors are sure he's stable." 6 months. The weight of those words crushed me. I couldn't fathom enduring half a year without him by my side. We had only just started our life together, and now this. My mind raced, panic and fear battling for control. My husband finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You have to be strong," he said, taking my hand in his. "If you want me to get better, this is the only way." I nodded, even though every fiber of my being screamed in protest. But as much as the thought of being without him terrified me, something else loomed even larger in my mind. My brother-in-law. His words, his actions, they were a dark cloud hovering over me. Without my husband around, I would be vulnerable. And after what had happened today, I knew he would seize the opportunity. An idea formed in my mind, a desperate attempt to escape the growing danger. "Can I stay at my mother's house while you're away?" I asked hesitantly. His reaction was immediate. He shook his head. "That's not possible." "Why not?" I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I already suggested it to my mother," he said. "She wouldn't hear of it. She scolded me for even bringing it up, said it was inappropriate for a new bride to leave her in-laws' house. She told me to make sure you didn't bring it up again." His words crushed the sliver of hope I'd clung to. I dropped my head into my hands, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. He thought my fear was about living without him, and while that was part of it, the real terror lay in what his absence would unleash. I could still see the rage in my brother-in-law's eyes from earlier. His face had turned red, his pupils dark and menacing. For the first time, he had looked like a predator, a wild animal ready to pounce. If my sister-in-law hadn't been nearby, I didn't want to imagine what might have happened. A shiver ran down my spine. My husband noticed and gently touched my shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked, concern lacing his voice. "Nothing," I lied quickly, shaking my head. "I'm fine." But I wasn't fine. My mind was a storm of fear and helplessness. What would happen in the coming months? How could I protect myself from a man who had already crossed so many lines? And most terrifying of all, what would he do next? As I sat there, my husband squeezed my hand, his touch a small comfort. But even as I held on to him, I couldn't shake the image of his brother's face. The fury, the obsession. My instincts told me this wasn't over. It was only the beginning. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of machines monitoring my husband's fragile condition. I sat beside him, trying to keep my own fears at bay, when suddenly the air seemed to shift. A familiar presence entered the room, one that sent a chill crawling up my spine. My brother-in-law walked in, his steps deliberate, his eyes scanning the space before settling on me. He smiled, a smile that was far too knowing, far too unsettling. "What's this, brother?" he said, addressing my husband, but keeping his gaze on me. "6 months in the hospital? What's going to happen to your lovely wife while you're gone?" I stiffened, my eyes darting to my husband, who chuckled softly, oblivious to the venom hiding behind those words. "You're here to take care of her, aren't you?" he said, his voice light, trusting. I turned to my husband, searching his face for some sign that he understood the danger lurking in the room. But his smile was genuine, filled with a naive faith in his younger brother. My heart ached with frustration. He didn't know. How could he? I had no proof, nothing to reveal the monster hiding behind that charming facade. And even if I did, my husband's loyalty to his brother would overshadow anything I could say. They had spent 27 years together, bound by blood and trust, while I was a newcomer, only 3 months into this family. "Don't worry, brother," my brother-in-law said, his tone dripping with mock sincerity. "I'll take care of her better than I take care of myself." The words hung in the air, heavy and threatening. My husband smiled, completely unaware, while I felt like the walls were closing in around me. If only he knew what taking care of me meant to his brother. If he even had an inkling of the truth, he wouldn't hesitate to put an end to it. But how could I tell him? How could I make him see that his brother, the man he trusted implicitly, was a predator circling his prey? I couldn't sit there any longer. I rose, intending to leave the room, but my husband grabbed my hand gently. "Stay," he said, his voice soft, "just until I fall asleep." I sat back down, the weight of my fear pressing harder against my chest. My husband closed his eyes, his grip on my hand loosening as he began to drift off. I glanced up, only to find my brother-in-law still watching me, his lips curled into a sinister smile. He raised his hand slightly, making a gesture so obscene that it took me a moment to fully comprehend it. When I did, my face burned with humiliation and rage. The shame was overwhelming. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but I couldn't. Not here, not in front of my husband. Instead, I stood abruptly and left the room, the need for fresh air clawing at my throat. I found myself in the gallery, leaning against the railing, taking deep, shaky breaths to calm my racing heart. But the calm didn't last long. I sensed him before I saw him, the faint sound of footsteps and the suffocating weight of his presence behind me. I turned, and there he was, his smile now a predator's grin. "What do you think?" he said, his voice low and filled with malice. "Should we plan for tonight? Or maybe tomorrow during the day? Tonight your husband won't be around, and tomorrow your mother-in-law will be out. Both seem like perfect opportunities, don't you think?" His words were like knives, cutting through the fragile composure I had left. My hand moved on its own, striking his face with all the force I could muster. The sound echoed in the gallery, and a red mark bloomed on his cheek. For a moment he seemed stunned, but then his grin returned, more twisted than before. "Go ahead," he said, his voice laced with cruelty. "Slap me all you want. It doesn't bother me, because soon enough, I'll have what I want from you. And after that, you—" "What's going on here?" A sharp voice cut through the tension. I turned to see a woman in a white coat, a doctor. She had witnessed the slap and now stared at my brother-in-law with a mix of suspicion and anger. "Why are you bothering her?" she demanded. Before I could speak, I blurted out, "He's my younger brother." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but I couldn't risk the truth coming out, not without evidence. The doctor's face softened, and she muttered a quick apology before walking away. I turned back to my brother-in-law, whose expression had darkened. He hated the implication of being called my younger brother. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, his eyes burning with fury. But I didn't care. For once, I had managed to gain some small, fleeting victory over him. I stepped away, needing to escape the suffocating tension. But as I took my first step, the world tilted violently. My vision blurred, and darkness crept in from the edges. The last thing I saw was his face, staring down at me with a mix of triumph and something else I couldn't place, before everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on a hospital bed. My head was throbbing, and the room felt eerily quiet. As I slowly opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was my brother-in-law sitting nearby, his face clouded with worry. His expression startled me. It was a far cry from the predatory look he usually wore. He leaned closer as he noticed I was awake. "How are you feeling now?" he asked, his voice soft, almost caring. For a moment, I was too shocked to respond. Could this really be the same man who had tormented me just hours ago? There was no trace of his usual smirk, no hint of malice. Instead, his face was etched with genuine concern. I sat up quickly, pulling away from him. "I don't need your concern," I said sharply. "I'm fine. You can leave now." He hesitated, then nodded and quietly left the room. His silence unnerved me even more than his presence. Why wasn't he arguing or making some sly remark? His sudden compliance only added to my unease. A few minutes later, the doctor entered. I seized the opportunity to ask her, "What happened to me? Why did I faint?" Before she could answer, my brother-in-law returned, his demeanor calm and composed. He interrupted the doctor with small talk, steering the conversation away from me. Then, with a casual charm that felt all too practiced, he led the doctor out of the room, leaving me alone once again. The pit in my stomach grew. Something felt wrong, terribly wrong. My instincts screamed that I wasn't safe, and I couldn't shake the feeling that my brother-in-law was orchestrating something sinister. A nurse came in shortly after. Desperate for answers, I asked her the same question. She offered a reassuring smile and explained, "You fainted because of low blood pressure. There's nothing to worry about." Her words brought some relief, but the anxiety lingered. I stayed in the hospital bed for a while longer, trying to collect my thoughts. When I finally stepped outside, my sister-in-law was waiting to take me home. As we drove, I couldn't stop thinking about my brother-in-law. His sudden shift in behavior felt like the calm before a storm. The car came to a halt, and my heart sank as my brother-in-law climbed in. I let out a deep breath, resigned to the fact that he would always be near, lurking in the shadows of my life. I had to find a way to protect myself, to survive in this suffocating environment. When we arrived home, I went straight to my mother-in-law's room. She had been waiting, her expression severe. "I can't believe how careless you've become," she scolded as soon as I entered. "Your husband's health has deteriorated because of you. It's your fault he's reached the second stage of cancer." Her words cut deep, each accusation sharper than the last. My chest tightened as I tried to explain, but she silenced me with a glare. Just then, my brother-in-law entered the room. "It's not her fault, Mother," he said, his voice unusually gentle. "Please, don't blame her." "Don't take her side," my mother-in-law snapped. "I know exactly who's at fault here." She stormed out, leaving me standing there, stunned and overwhelmed. My brother-in-law gestured for me to leave, and I quietly retreated to my room. Once inside, the dam broke. I sobbed uncontrollably, my tears falling for my helplessness, for my husband's illness, and for the unrelenting weight of my circumstances. Over the following days, my brother-in-law's behavior changed drastically. The hostility in his eyes softened, replaced by a strange politeness. He no longer looked at me with the same predatory intent, and his tone grew respectful, almost deferential. I couldn't tell if it was guilt over his brother's illness or something else entirely, but deep down, I knew better than to trust him. His sudden transformation felt like a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to catch me off guard. My mother-in-law began spending most of her time outside the house, returning late at night. When I asked her where she went, she dismissed my questions, telling me to focus on my chores. My sister-in-law, who was married and rarely visited, stopped coming altogether. She now only went to the hospital to see her brother, making it clear where her priorities lay. As for my brother-in-law, he was always home. His studies had finished a few months ago, and he had taken over managing a herbal store the family owned. But lately, he had been leaving the store in the hands of employees and spending his days locked in his room. Whatever he was doing in there, I didn't want to know. Every interaction with him felt like walking on a tightrope. His words were measured, his actions calculated. He no longer pushed boundaries overtly, but his presence was a constant reminder of the threat he posed. I couldn't shake the feeling that his apparent kindness was just the prelude to something far more dangerous. The house felt like a cage, each day more suffocating than the last. I lived in constant fear, torn between the hope of my husband's recovery and the dread of what might happen in his absence. My brother-in-law's shadow loomed large over my life, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the web he had woven around me tightened. Days passed in a haze of routine and unease. My brother-in-law rarely left his room, emerging only to eat. His sudden withdrawal seemed odd, but I was too preoccupied with my own fears to dwell on it. The constant dread I had felt since my husband's illness was slowly ebbing away. I began to tell myself that maybe, just maybe, I could endure this. But one afternoon, he came out of his room holding a small jar. His face lit up with an almost childlike excitement. "I made this myself," he said, his tone deceptively cheerful. "I put a lot of effort into it. Try it, and tell me what you think." I hesitated but took the jar from him, wary of his intentions. Something about the way he lingered, watching me expectantly, made me uneasy. Still, I convinced myself it was harmless, a sweet gesture perhaps. I tasted the preserve, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash upon myself. Within minutes, a strange sensation began to course through my body. My heart raced, my skin felt hot, and a suffocating restlessness took hold. I felt as though I had lost control over my own mind, my emotions overtaking every ounce of reason. Panic set in as I realized something was terribly wrong. Across the room, my brother-in-law stood, his predatory smile widening as he watched my struggle. "You?" I gasped, trying to steady myself. "What did you do?" Instead of answering, he laughed, a cold, menacing sound that echoed in my ears. The feelings consuming me were beyond anything I could comprehend. Desire, confusion, rage, it all blurred together, overwhelming me. I felt an uncontrollable pull toward him, a terrifying compulsion to close the distance between us. I took a step forward, then another, but before I could act on the madness coursing through me, the door swung open. My mother-in-law stood there, her face a mix of shock and confusion. Her unexpected entrance jolted me back, if only slightly, but the feeling still raged within me. "Leave!" I spat, my voice trembling with anger and frustration. "Get out of here!" She stared at me, her disbelief evident, but she didn't move. My brother-in-law looked equally stunned by her arrival, his expression briefly faltering. Then, as if recovering from his shock, he grabbed my arm and shoved me into the room, locking the door behind him and his mother. I was trapped, alone with the storm inside me. For the next hour, I writhed in discomfort, battling the effects of whatever he had given me. My thoughts were muddled, my body betraying me. When the haze finally began to lift, clarity returned with a vengeance, and so did my fury. I stormed into his room that evening, determined to confront him. "What did you do to me?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he rose to his feet, his expression calm, almost serene. "I love you," he said simply. "From the moment I first saw you, I knew I had to have you. You didn't make it easy, though. You're stubborn, loyal to my brother. So I had to find another way." My stomach turned as he continued, his tone disturbingly casual. "That preserve? It was infused with a special formula, something I made myself. It heightens emotions, breaks down inhibitions, makes people more susceptible to suggestion. Perfect, don't you think?" "You're insane," I spat, backing away from him. He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Maybe, but it doesn't matter. You'll be mine one way or another." I reached for the door, desperate to escape, but he grabbed my arm, pulling me back. His grip was iron. "You're carrying my brother's child," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "That child can't be born. If it is, everything will be ruined." The sheer audacity of his words stunned me. He sounded like a madman, deranged and completely detached from reality. But even in my fear, I saw an opportunity. My hand brushed against the phone in my pocket, and I hit record. "Why?" I asked, keeping my voice steady, trying to buy time. "Why does the baby matter?" "Because," he said, his eyes blazing with intensity, "once the baby is born, you'll never truly be mine. But if I get rid of it, you'll have no choice but to depend on me, to belong to me." His confession was chilling, but it was exactly what I needed. I yanked my arm free and stormed out of the room, my heart pounding. The recording on my phone was still running, capturing every word of his deranged plan. I didn't stop until I was out of the house. My mother-in-law called after me, alarmed by my sudden departure. But I didn't care. I headed straight for the hospital, where my husband lay recovering. When I showed him the recording, his face darkened with rage. His hands clenched into fists, and I could see the fury boiling beneath his calm exterior. "We'll deal with this," he said through gritted teeth, "but not like this. Not with anger. We need to be smart." He was right. As much as I wanted justice, I knew we had to tread carefully. "I can't stay in that house," I said, my voice trembling. "Not with him there." "You won't," he promised. With his blessing, I returned to my parents' home, where I finally felt safe. In the weeks that followed, I saw a doctor who confirmed my worst fears. "The dosage you ingested was dangerously high," she said. "If you had consumed more, it could have been fatal for your baby." Her words solidified my resolve. I spent 6 months at my parents' house, healing and preparing for the future. When my husband's treatment was complete, we moved into a home of our own, far from the shadows of his family. Even now, I thank my mother-in-law for that unexpected intrusion, for being the unknowing savior who disrupted his twisted plans. Without her, I might have lost everything, my sanity, my child, and my life. But in the end, I survived, and that survival was my greatest triumph.